How's it going, guys? So today I wanted to talk about some coding concepts and vocabulary, and this is really kind of going to be a review. You guys should have by now already done some coding exercises that involve all of these concepts and all of this vocabulary, but I want to make sure that you really have it cemented in your mind because it is going to be so important for your coding career going forward. Okay? So, without further ado, let's just hop into the first one. So events, coding events. An event is an action that causes something to happen, right? You guys all know what an event is, right? For instance, we've got a list of some common events down below. The first one would be it starts raining. So the reaction to that would be open an umbrella. Second one is the bell rings. The reaction to that is students go to class. Third one, the power button is pressed on, say, a computer. The reaction is the computer turns on. The mouse button is clicked. The reaction is the computer opens an application. Okay. The event is the cause in cause and effect. Here we've got cause on the left and the effects on the right, right? Or at least action and reaction. So, try to think up some other events and maybe some subsequent sort of reactions that could occur when those events happen. Okay. Now, an event handler in programming, an event handler is part of your program that runs, part of your code that runs when specific events happen. So the event handler handles the event, right? Just like the person is handling the fact that it started raining by opening the umbrella. You're the event handler in that situation. You're handling the event. So these are all examples from Microsoft's MakeCode Minecraft coding platform where you can actually make mods for Minecraft. They're very cool. But so these are events and they start with the word on. So I say they sort of look like an alligator, right? It almost looks like an open mouth. And you can fill this open mouth with blocks of code. So the event here would be on player walk. And you could put in a block of code that said every time a player walks forward, make the ground turn gold beneath them, right? Change the earth blocks to gold blocks in Minecraft. You could do that. On a block being placed down, you could have something happen. You could make the weather change every time somebody places a block. On an animal being killed, and this egg, if anybody's really into Minecraft, you might know what that is. That's a chicken egg. So when a chicken is killed, what should happen, right? You could add all sorts of things there. The player could get hurt, right? As kind of instant justice, instant karma to the player. So these are event handlers, okay? And chat commands, people can actually type something into the chat. These are all just examples of event handlers, parts of the code that handle the event. And you fill the code up sort of like a function, and we'll learn what functions are in just a second. You fill the empty space inside of this sort of alligator mouth up with code, and it runs all the code you want it to when it sees the event happen, when the computer detects that the event happens. Moving on. Second term, although event and event handler are technically two terms. Here's our second big one, variables. So a variable, you might know variables from math. In math and algebra, you can take any number that you want to and assign it to a variable, okay? So A could equal 65, B could equal 22, and then you could say A plus B equals what? Equals C, and you have to figure out what C would be, okay? Well, anyways, in coding, variables kind of act the same. They're sort of something that you use. They're a name that you use in place of a value, and a piece of information that can change. So here's some examples in this picture. This student's name is Jeremy. Okay, there's his name. His age is 14. And is he a sports fan? It says false. And we'll actually, in just a second, we'll learn what all three of these different types of variables are. Okay, so variables become an important way to store information in your code and to make your code more flexible, because as Jeremy gets older, it wouldn't break his code if he turns 15 all of a sudden. He could just update that where it says age, and then the code would continue to work for him as a 15-year-old as well. You'll see more later about how important variables are. But anyways, here's a question. What are some things in your school day or your school year that stay the same typically? What are some things that stay the same? I'll start you off kind of imagining some things by saying that the one thing that should stay the same throughout the entire school year is the time that school starts every day, or the time that school ends. That last bell rings, or whatever, your last class is over and you're finally done. That time of the day should stay the same. For instance, right now during this school year, it's 8:20, right? 8:20 is when we start. So that stays the same. Those are called constants. Let's call those constants. Okay. And you can have constants in your code. If you know you want a certain number to use a certain number in your code and you never want that to change, you don't have to use a variable. You just put the number in your code and we call that a constant. Now, what are some things that change throughout your school day or your school year? Here's an idea. The what's on the lunch menu every day changes, right? What's on the lunch menu every day changes. So if we were going to state that like a variable, you could call the variable today's lunch, and then you would say equals, and then that would change every day. So for today, for instance, it might equal nachos. For tomorrow, it might equal salad. Who knows? But the variable, the name of the variable always stays the same, and that was today's lunch. So think up, what are some other things that change all the time during school? Okay, let's call those variables. All right, maybe the teacher that you have for third hour, which is your hour that you have an elective, that teacher will change throughout the school year, right? So you could call that variable third hour teacher. So think of some other examples and maybe share them in the chat or in a discussion. All right, let's take a brain break. Let's move on. So here's some different types of variables. This is what I was talking about earlier, and I'll go back to this picture. It's annoying I have to click that much, but I'll go back to this picture in just a second, and we'll talk about what all three of those variables are. Let's talk about them here, though. So different types of variables. The main, or not the main, but the simplest one to understand is just a number variable. A number variable just holds some numerical data, meaning a number, just a regular old number. It could be a person's age, a player's score. If you're playing a video game and it's keeping track of your score, that could be a variable. The year, right? Right now, for instance, is 2020. So here's an example I wrote of a variable. It's called my age. That's how I would write it. And we can talk about that later, but that's how I would write that variable. Equals 38. That is my actual age right now. In about a month, it'll be 39. A string variable holds a string, and don't worry too much about what this word means, but of alphanumeric characters. And the word alphanumeric just means it can be letters or numbers. Doesn't really matter. And examples of this would be a person's name or a password or the day of the week. Okay. So a string just means it's a bunch of gobbledygook strung together. Letters, numbers, symbols. It really doesn't matter. You can just jam a bunch of stuff together. And as long as typically what you have to do to show that it's a string is that you put it in quotes. And as long as it's all put in quotes together, your code won't be bothered by that. It'll just say, oh, that's a string. So this could read my name, and it could be my full name, Clark Avery Eagling, comma, the third, comma, Esquire. Doesn't matter. As long as we've got the whole thing inside quotes, the code should know it's a string. Okay, so that's what a string is. So we've learned two, number and string. Moving on. Boolean, that's a weird word, right? Boolean. The Boolean variable has only two possible values, true or false. True or false. So just what a weird word to give to a true or false variable. But that's what it means. Think of it as a switch, like a light switch. It's on or it's off. So an example would be, is it daytime? For me right now, the answer to that is false. It's 8 p.m. right now. Is the class over? The answer to that right now is false as well. If you're watching this during class, our class, of course, is not over, right? So they're just true or false. So I wrote an example one that says class over equals false, okay? And in make code, which is what the kind of coding that we can use to make an arcade game, the position variable is just a special kind of number variable that holds two numbers at once, the x coordinate and the y coordinate. And we'll get back into that more later. But just remember that it's basically where something is on your screen right now. Okay, so if a character is in the very top left corner, the position variable would be 0, 0 for that. And then depending on how many pixels over or how many pixels down it is, those numbers go up. So that's all you need to know about position variable for now. Going back to this picture and thinking about the three variables that this student is talking about here, we've got three. This is actually representing three of the different types of variables we just learned about. So let's think about it. Age equals 14. Which kind of variable is that out of the ones that we just went over? Is it number? Is it string? Or is it Boolean? It's not position. None of these are position, so don't worry about that. It would be number, of course. It's just a plain old number. Now, what about Jeremy? And remember, here's a hint. It's got quotes around it. Number, string, or Boolean. Which one? That would be a string. The quotes give it away. That's a string. Finally, sports fan equals false. Number, string, or Boolean? That's Boolean, of course. Boolean is that weird word that we give to something that's either true or false. Okay? So those are variables. And those are the three main types that I want you to know about right now. Those are probably the most important types to learn right off the bat. All right, third thing to go over, functions. You guys use functions hopefully in code.org already. But functions, you might remember them. They were green in code.org, I believe. In make code, the thing that we're going to make games in, they're blue. So these are two functions I made just as a very quick and easy example. But a function, don't think too hard about functions. Functions have that alligator look to them, like that. And then you'd name the function whatever you want the name of the function to be. And all a function is an empty container that you can put a bunch of code into. That's all it is. It's an empty container that you put a bunch of code into. And then when you want that code to run, you quote unquote call the function. You call out the function's name to make the code run whenever you want. So really, you just use functions to break up your code a little bit and put them into nice, neat little containers so that it's a little bit easier to find, to organize your code, to read your code later on, because everything's in nice, neat little containers where you can more easily find it. And to reuse, what's nice about functions is you can reuse them over and over and over again. If instead of having to put all this code in here over and over, if I want this to happen, say 10 times, I could just copy this call do something part and paste it 10 times and it would run this 10 times for me. Okay. Or I could put this one in a repeat block and it would run 10 times for me. So that's all they are. Functions are just empty containers. You give them a name, and when you want them to run, you call them. That's it. That's it. You call out the name of the container, and it runs all the code inside of it. All right, let's take another brain break. So a variable is a container for just one piece of information. A function is a container for as much code as you want. And if we think back, there's a reason why event handlers have that same alligator look. Event handlers are essentially a special kind of function that looks for something to happen. The computer is watching for something to happen, and then it runs kind of the function that you've put inside of it once that thing happens. So an event handler is a special kind of function. Here's another special kind of function, a conditional. Again, in code.org, you may recall they were the ones that said if path to the left, for example, then you would put turn left as the action to take. Okay, so it's almost like an event handler, right? If it rains, then open your umbrella. If you see a path to the left, then turn left, right? It's almost like that. What makes conditionals a little bit different is it's really a lot more about true and false. So it's not just looking for an event to happen. It can run code to whether or not something is true or false. Okay, so here's some things. Here's a real world example. Have you ever had a parent say, if you clean your room, you can go out with your friends? Or have they ever said, if your homework's done, then you could play video games? Or have they ever said, if you do all your chores this week, then you get your allowance, or else you are grounded? Okay, so now we've got two things. There's two realities that can happen next, depending on whether you do your chores. If you do your chores, then you get your allowance. If you don't do your chores, then you are grounded. Okay, there's something that'll happen if it's true, and there's something that'll happen if it's false. And those are all examples of conditionals. Conditionals follow the format of if this happens, then that. Okay, so again, it's sort of like an event handler, but with two paths. If you do your chores, then we go down this true path. Then you get your allowance. This is the nice path. If you don't do your chores, then it's false. You go down the false path. Then it was you're grounded. Okay, there's the not so nice reality. So that's the important thing about a conditional is that you can add the else path. Okay, here's another example. If it is snowing, then wear boots, or else wear shoes. Okay, and the else path makes sure that some kind of action is happening, is performed, some kind of code is being run, no matter whether something's true or false. And what this does, you see that in yellow, what I wrote down at the bottom, what conditionals do is they let computers make decisions. And that's what we call artificial intelligence. Okay, when your computer is really starting to make some decisions based on whether something is true or false, that's it really starting to gain an intelligence, at least an artificial one, that we have built into the system. Okay, so conditionals are very important. They're very cool. And if you're trying to make something interactive, like you're trying to make a video game with other players or enemies or whatever that seem really realistic and seem to really be alive, you need to be using conditionals. Okay, so they're very important to understand. So let's review from the top. An event was something that occurs, something that happens that the computer can detect. Very common events are a mouse click, the computer detecting a mouse click on a button, for instance, or someone using their arrow keys on their keyboard. That's another event. An event handler then is code that reacts to that event. So if someone clicks on the button that says go, you write an event handler that tells the computer what to do when somebody clicks on that button. Okay? A variable was a name given to a piece of information that can change. And remember, it's like a little empty box with a name, and you can put whatever you want in that box, but it should just be one piece of information. Okay? And the three main types I told you guys about were a number, a string, and Boolean, which just meant yes or no, true or false, right? A conditional was if something, let me skip to function because I've got these out of order. A function is another empty container with a name, but this time you can put a bunch of code into the container, really as much code as you want. You'll see functions out there that could be 100 lines of code, 100 different instructions, all given a name. And when you want that function to run, when you want all that code to run, you call the function. You call the function's name out, okay? And it'll run. So that a function is sort of like a variable, except variable is just one piece of information. For instance, my age, 38, whereas a function is code, a bunch of code. A conditional is like a special event or event handler, except they always read if something is true, then something will happen, or else something else will happen. So always remember it's if, then, else. Okay. That's a conditional. And you can have conditionals that don't have the else part. Okay. If this is true, then do that. You can also have that kind of conditional. Okay. All right. So those are our concepts for today. That's our vocabulary for today. I hope you understood this, and I hope it comes in really handy to you when you're making your games or any other kind of code that you're making. Enjoy.